In 2019, AirshowStuff and This Is Flight recorded countless hours of airshow action across Europe and North America. In this two-part series, we focus not on the regular displays seen year in, year out, but on the rare overseas appearances, new performers, and one-off set-piece displays that made 2019 so unique. Part 1 of this programme showcases 2019's military airshow action. We'll visit Yuma for dramatic air power demonstrations featuring the F-5, F-35 and Harrier, and take in a rare 4-ship US Air Force heritage flight at Oshkosh. At Aviation Nation, highlights include the all-new F-35A demo team and the spectacular Combined Arms demonstration. On the other side of the Atlantic, we'll dip into some of the award-winning performances at this year's Royal International Air Tattoo, including the spectacular Finnish F-18 Hornet. AeroBaltic in Poland brings us Eastern Bloc fighters in the form of the Su-22 Fitter and Su-27 Flanker. We also show the Spanish Army's memorable Tiger demonstration at sunset at Festa Alcel. Part 2 is dedicated to Warbird Airshow Action, and the 75th anniversary of D-Day features prominently, with mass flyovers of Dakotas in the UK and at Oshkosh. The P-51 Mustang makes a strong showing with large-scale set-piece displays at several shows, and we'll also see the world's only flying XP-82 Twin Mustang. The Shuttleworth collection provides some unforgettable memories as ever, not least a pair of Avro 504Ks and a historic 7-ship formation of Hawker Hurricanes. Thunder over Michigan made history too, with its combined display of no fewer than 11 Corsairs. And there's plenty of classic jet action throughout Part 2, the Viggen and Hunter of the Swedish Air Force historic flight in Poland, and a pair of CT-133 Silver Stars at Airshow London in Canada, not to mention a stunning sunset performance by Randy Ball in his MiG-17 at Goshen. This is Airshow Action 2019. We start in the UK at one of the first shows of the European airshow season. At the time, we thought the 2019 Abingdon Air and Country Show would be the last full-scale airshow at Abingdon, as the cost of running the event increases year on year. Organisers pull together a varied lineup to give the flying display a fitting farewell, although later in the summer they announced small aerial displays will still feature at future events. We'll focus primarily on the classic helicopter action. The Gazelle was designed in France, but was also manufactured in the UK and to a lesser extent in Egypt and Yugoslavia, and it's been a mainstay of the British military ever since 1973, serving with the Air Force, the Navy and the Army Air Corps. And indeed, the Army Air Corps still fly the Gazelle today, along with 18 other military operators around the world. Most of the 38 volunteers that form the team are former members of the Army Air Corps Blue Eagles or the Royal Navy Sharks display teams, and this display is flown partly as a tribute to those two defunct aerobatic teams. We're sticking with vintage helicopters, but first, a de Havilland Beaver AL-1 leaps into the air, followed by an Oster AOP-9.
An active Gazelle pilot flying the Oster AOP-9 takes off in between the
They're joined by an Augusta Bell Sioux AH-1 and a Westland Scout AH-1, and together they make up the historic Army aircraft flight. Founded in 1980, the flight are tasked with maintaining one example each of every type operated by the Army Air Corps since its inception in 1957. The team was funded by the Ministry of Defence initially until funding was cut in 2013, and 4 aircraft were transferred over to the civilian register over the years that followed to help secure their future in the air. And 6 years on, here we are, watching the very first 4-ship display since then. We'll get a good look now at the very attractive Scout, which started out in life as the Saunders Roe Sarrow, which never got beyond the prototype stage. Westland then took over the project and developed the Sarrow into the Westland Scout for the British Army and the Air Force, and the Westland Wasp for the Royal Navy, with around 300 units produced across both design iterations. And then the Belle Sioux, which first flew in 1945. But as is traditional for Army Air Corps helicopters, the UK wanted to manufacture the Sioux domestically. Unfortunately though, an existing agreement with Sikorsky banned Westland from producing any competing American helicopters, so instead Britain licensed the design from Augusta in Italy. The first UK-built Westland Sioux finally rolled off the production line in 1965. 2019 was the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings in Normandy. And on the week of the invasion, a mass gathering of 23 Dakotas assembled at Duxford before reenacting the cross-channel flight to France. The formation was led by That's All Brother, the very aircraft which led this formation for real 75 years ago. We'll watch the formation passing over from our vantage point on the banks of the River Medway in Kent. The Shuttleworth Collection's many annual air shows are on any dedicated Warbird enthusiast's bucket list. The 2019 Military Airshow brought together one of their most impressive lineups of the year, as organisers staged a sublime afternoon of aerial entertainment over this characterful grass airfield. The atmosphere at Shuttleworth is unique. People often say airshows here are more like garden parties with optional flying displays, and it's also a photographer's favourite, the curved crowd line making Shuttleworth the perfect place for sweeping topside passes. One of the most anticipated displays at the Military Airshow was to be a combined performance by all 3 of Europe's original airworthy Avro 504Ks joining together for the first time. In the event we only got 2, but still, it was a pleasure to see 2 of these very successful First World War machines in the sky together. What Shuttleworth does best are these wonderful set-piece displays with multiple performances taking place at once. There might be several aircraft flying low-level circuits at the same time, possibly 1 or 2 more performing aerobatics high above the airfield, and underneath it all, constant takeoffs and landings as aircraft leave and join the fray. This means the spectacle is always evolving, but never stopping. First up in this next scenario is the first ever flying display by this replica Royal Aircraft Factory S.E.5. It's joined by the Bristol M1C. Unfortunately, the British War Office deeply mistrusted monoplanes in general during the First World War. They believed they were harder to fly, difficult to land, and structurally weaker than more conventional designs. And as a result, only 130 Bristol M1s were ever built, and this is the only flying survivor. The Sopwith triplane takes off to join the action now.
Designed by rotary engines.
And here the Sopwith Camel, introduced in 1917 and developed from the equally successful Sopwith Pup.
Controls the fuel air mixture, which goes in.
As the Camel ends its display, you'll see one of those lovely sweeping top sides that this unique venue permits. It's very rare to see a German airshow performance in the UK, even a civilian one, but this is Tobias Ruppel in the Focke-Wulf FW44 Stieglitz.
A dastardly trick, I'm sure, but coming out of the sun, directly above us now, pulling up into the first loop of the sequence. And this is set to be a copybook display, I'm sure, by Tobias Ruppel in the Focke-Wulf FW44 Stieglitz.
It served with 20 military operators, usually as a training aircraft, but it was also a very accomplished aerobatic performer. And indeed, many of the competitors at the 1936 Berlin Olympics aerobatic competition flew Stieglitzes, including the gold medal winner. The displays were actually flown within the track and field stadium, which just goes to show what a compact display you can pull off in one of these.
Flown by the chief engineer, Kurt. Such aircraft as a Focke-Wulf 190. Interesting to know what might have happened.
But the highlight of the Shuttleworth Military Airshow was an historic gathering of half of the world's airworthy Hawker Hurricanes. This was the largest formation of Hurricanes in the UK since the 1940s, and a really very special display indeed. So sit back and enjoy it. The BBMF's Hurricane Mark IIC PZ-865, the last Hurricane ever built, breaks off for a solo flyby. Now Hurricane Mark 1 501, Mark 1 4118 and Mark 7 P3700 break into a tail chase. Shuttleworth Sea Hurricane Mark 1B leads in Mark 1 P3717 and Mark 1 P902, and the latter breaks away for a solo display. Textbook example of how to stage a mass warbird display. Big formations, tail chases, aerobatics and constant action. And all of this was at one of 9 Shuttleworth Airshows in 2019. Little wonder they are known as one of the best warbird airshow venues in the world. But now we turn to the United States and we visit America's Freedom Fest in Goshen, Indiana. First up, C-54 Skymaster, Spirit of Freedom. When the Soviet Union blocked road and rail access to West Berlin in 1948, this very aircraft, then operated by the US Navy, was one of countless C-47s and C-54s which delivered essential supplies as part of the Berlin Airlift. Almost 280,000 flights took place in all, and at its peak, an aircraft took off or landed in West Berlin every 30 seconds on average. Sadly, this aircraft was badly damaged by a tornado in April 2020, and it's not yet known if or when the aircraft will be able to fly again. We return to our classic helicopter theme one more time with this Vietnam War demonstration by the Sky Soldiers. First up you see an AH-1 Cobra performing ground attack runs, clearing the way for the arrival of ground troops on a pair of UH-1 Hueys. And now for one of the best classic jet displays you'll ever see. Randy Ball in his MiG-17 Fresco. The Mikhail Gurevich MiG-17 is a development of the highly successful MiG-15, Russia's first operational jet fighter, and it flew for the first time in 1952. The MiG-17 could accelerate faster and turn harder than almost anything the West had to offer. This was in part due to its incredibly light weight of just 3.9 tons. Compare that to the F-86 Saber's empty weight of over 11 tons. By the time of the Vietnam War, the MiG-17 was certainly outclassed by more modern Western fighters, but that didn't stop the North Vietnamese Air Force inflicting surprisingly heavy losses on the US Air Force. In the end, the US military scored a kill ratio of a little over 2 to 1, which is 5 times worse than their performance against MiG-15s in the Korean War, despite their enemy being inexperienced, poorly equipped, and massively outnumbered. So that really does speak volumes for these nimble little aircraft. Even in 2020, the MiG-17 remains in limited service today as the main combat aircraft of the Madagascan Air Force, and also the Chinese license-built version, the Shenyang J-5, still flies for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The Experimental Aircraft Association's AirVenture Show in Oshkosh is the world's greatest aviation celebration. 2019 was a record year for the show, with over 10,000 visiting aircraft, of which 2,758 were showplanes. 400 of those were Warbirds, a 6% increase on the previous year. You can see plenty more from Oshkosh in our dedicated 50 minutes highlights programme here on the Airshow Stuff YouTube channel. But here we've selected a handful of the best Warbird performances. We start with AirVenture's own tribute to the 75th anniversary of D-Day, with flypasts by the aircraft of the D-Day Squadron, which had just returned from the Daks Over Normandy event in Europe that we saw a few moments ago. Making a very welcome AirVenture debut, Rod Lewis's de Havilland Mosquito FB6, the so-called wooden wonder, leads in the Fairey Firefly, the carrier-borne fighter and anti-submarine aircraft, and a Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9.
I wouldn't shoot pyro that low.
Back out to the east. Spitfire got the load. Spitfire, thanks. And Mosquito, you got the load? We got it. Come on. Firefly, we put that load in sight. Firefly's got load. Bernie, check your mic. Bernie, check your mic. It ain't no more.
And the Spitfire is now joined by a P-51C Mustang, and the Mustang and its derivatives make up the rest of our Oshkosh coverage. One of the highlights of AirVenture 2019 was a mass display of some 18 Mustangs on Thursday, comprising B, C and D models, as well as a very rare H variant Mustang. This display was a tribute to the World War II Triple Ace Clarence Bud Anderson, who flew the Mustang in the European theatre during the Second World War and later became a highly respected test pilot. And he's still alive today at the grand old age of 97 at the time that this footage was recorded. So, time again for me to shut up and let you enjoy the sound of these wonderful fighters in action.
Do you have anybody on the north side, or do we need to still stay south of 97? You need to stay south of 97. Ready,
Here we have another Mustang of sorts with the AirVenture debut of the world's sole airworthy XP-82. This is the prototype version of the P-52 Twin Mustang, or as it was later known, the F-82, which was designed as a long-range escort fighter for the Second World War. The conflict ended before the P-82 was ready to enter service, but by the end of the 1940s it was taken on as an interim escort fighter and interceptor, pending the introduction of all-weather jet aircraft capable of taking on those roles. And this is no Warbird, but it's about to be joined by a further 3 Mustangs for a very special 4-ship US Air Force heritage flight. So once again, enjoy the sound of the engines as we experience 3 Rolls-Royce Packard Merlins and 2 Pratt & Whitney FW119 engines in formation. Thunder Over Michigan is another show well known for its epic Warbird spectacles, and 2019 was no exception with its theme of Corsair Crazy. No fewer than 11 Corsairs turned out to participate in the flying display, probably the largest gathering of the type since the 1950s. The show started with all 11 aircraft flying over in a single formation before breaking into a racetrack pattern around the airport. The Corsair was one of the most capable carrier-based fighters of the Second World War, and the aircraft saw particularly outstanding service in the Pacific Theatre, where it racked up a kill ratio of 11-1 against Imperial Japanese forces. That's the lowest loss rate of any fighter in the Pacific Theatre. It was also used as a fighter bomber in the Korean War and in the French colonial wars, with a total of over 12,000 aircraft being produced for over a dozen military operators. And this is quite extraordinary, a huge line abreast formation of Corsairs passing over the airfield to end their show. But it wasn't just the Corsairs that captured attention at Thunder Over Michigan, because like at Oshkosh, the show also featured a large gathering of Mustangs. This time, 8 examples sharing the sky, 7 Ds and 1 B, performing ground attack runs during a mock battle between Allied and German troops on the ground.
Same size weapon, same weapon. Yeah, the later models, 51, they were devastating against ground forces.
With German troops gaining the upper hand, it's time to bring in the big guns in the form of 2 B-25 Mitchells, Yankee Warrior and George's Gal, and their presence helped deliver an eventual Allied victory in this scenario. With almost 10,000 built, the B-25 was one of the most produced bombers of the Second World War, and remained in service with many operators over the following 4 decades. Perhaps its most famous operation, though, was the Doolittle raid on the 18th of April 1942, America's retaliation to the attack on Pearl Harbor, which was the first air operation to strike the Japanese mainland. And while the raid caused little damage in itself, it proved to both Japan and to the American public at home that Japan was vulnerable to US air attack. Since its first show in 2015, Gdynia Aerobaltic in Poland has quickly grown into one of Europe's largest and most varied air shows. With up to 9 hours of daily flying displays split across 2 venues, there's far too much to feature here. Like many of the other shows we're featuring in this programme, there's a dedicated Airshow Dispatches film about this event on the This Is Flight YouTube channel. We start with the Orlik Memorial Flight. The Orlik Aerobatic Team are just one of Poland's 2 big military aerobatic teams, flying, as the name would suggest, the PZL-130 Orlik, But make no mistake, this is not a regular Team Orlick display. Normal displays are highly accomplished 7, 8 or 9 aircraft performances, but with the Orlick fleet undergoing upgrades over the last few years, the team have been flying in much smaller groups, and they've also been staging this so-called Orlick Memorial Flight, which sees 3 Orlicks flying with a pair of T6 Harvards. It's an odd choice, as Poland has never actually operated the Harvard, but 2 aircraft of comparable roles nonetheless. Probably the most anticipated civilian performers at this year's show were a pair of jets from the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight stable. The flight is one of Europe's biggest collections of classic jets flying in civilian hands. They have 2 each of the Viggen and Draken, as well as a Tunnen, Lansen and Hunter. This specifically is the 2-seat training variant of the Viggen, the SK-37. During the 1970s, the Viggen was quite possibly the most advanced combat aircraft in its class. It was aerodynamically extremely sophisticated, not least because it was the first mass-produced fighter to be fitted with canards. It had a top speed of Mach 2.1 and a service ceiling of 59,000 feet, which made it one of the very few fighters capable of intercepting and locking on to SR-71 Blackbirds. Though, of course, that was only ever done for fun. It also had exceptional slow-speed performance and would regularly operate from temporary airstrips and roads. Ultimately, though, there were no export sales, but the Viggen remained an integral part of Sweden's Air Force right up until its retirement in 2005. The Hawker Hunter Mark 50 is the only foreign jet design flown by the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight. It was designated the J-34 in Swedish service. And the Hunters really were procured as a stopgap to make up for shortcomings with the Saab Tunnen until the Saab Draken came along at the end of the 1960s, and the Swedes have never used a foreign fighter design since then. This aircraft wears the colours of the short-lived Acro Hunters, the Swedish Air Force's display team for the 1962 season. But many other military teams also use the Hunter, including Osprey Red, later known as the Black Knights, the Patrie Suisse, the Rough Diamonds, the Red Devils, the RAF's first official team, the Blue Diamonds, and perhaps most famously, the record-breaking 22 aircraft RAF Black Arrows in the late 50s. The Spirit of St. Louis Airshow had one of the most anticipated lineups of any American airshow in 2019. And you can see several of the sought-after military performers in Part 1. The Red Arrows on their North American tour, and the Boeing T-7 Red Hawk are among them. But it's the Warbird segment we turn to, and we kick off with a trio of heavies, B-17 Flying Fortress, A-26 Invader, and B-25 Mitchell. And if, by the way, you'd like to see more of these individual performances, many of them are available to watch in full with no narration on the Airshow Stuff YouTube channel. Next, a Spitfire leads a P-51 Mustang and a Corsair. Our final show of the programme is Airshow London in Canada, which hosted some extremely rare classic jet action in 2019. Not least, a pair of CT-133 Silver Stars, which flew in formation with a DH-115 Vampire and with a CF-18 Hornet. But we start off with a Vampire solo display flown by Jerry Connolly. The Vampire is the second British jet fighter to enter service, which it did in 1946, and it kick-started what went on to become a classic style of twin boom designs among British jet fighters. The problem was that in early jet engines, long intakes or long jet pipes severely sapped the amount of power available. So mounting the engines on the wings was one way to get around this, but that meant if one engine failed, the aircraft became almost uncontrollable, and the Meteor gained the nickname Meatbox for exactly that reason. Running the engine exhaust along the full length of a tail would also reduce its efficiency, so this twin boom design became extremely common, and you'll see it not just in the Vampire but also in the Venom and the Sea Vixen, all three of which were enormously successful designs in their own right.
Vampire Mark IIIs continue to be flown by 6 auxiliary services, our squadrons, and the Royal Canadian Air Force until the end of 1956. Total of 85 Vampires flew for the Canadian Forces. All right, nice and low, but now up into the knife edge. 2 to inverted, and now 3 to knife edge, and 4 back up. A nicely executed 4-point hesitation roll by Jerry Connolly.
The Vampire truly was a pioneer of aviation. In 1945, it became the first jet-powered aircraft to take off and land from an aircraft carrier in the hands of the legendary test pilot Eric Winkle Brown. 1947 saw the debut of the 54 Squadron Display Team, the first aerobatic team ever to use jet-powered aircraft. They flew 3 of these Vampires. And also in 1947, the Vampire became the first jet to cross the Atlantic when that very aerobatic team conducted the first ever goodwill tour to the United States by a European aerobatic team. Soon, many other teams followed suit. The Royal Canadian Air Force Blue Devils, Australia's Telstars, the Central Flying School Red Sails, also from Australia, the Yellowhammers from New Zealand, the Bumbling Bees from South Africa, Cavallini Rampanti from Italy. That gives you an idea just how good this aircraft must have been.
And here comes our CT-133.
We continue rifling through defunct aerobatic teams now as 2 Silver Stars take to the air, that being the Canadian designation for the T-33 Shooting Star. This too equipped several aerobatic teams, Whiskey 4 from the Netherlands and the US Air Force Acrojets, for example, and a combat version, the P-80, would equip many more. But the red aircraft here also carries airshow pedigree. It's in the colours of Red Knight, a Royal Canadian Air Force solo display act, active from 1958 to 1969.
Okay, here they come again from our left this time in trail formation.
That particular airframe made its first post-restoration flight in 2018, and the second Silver Star, Black Knight, only flew for the first time in early 2019.
And they're coming in from the right. Check this out, folks. Here comes the Red Knight from our left.
This, however, is not a classic jet. Well, not officially. It's the Royal Canadian Air Force CF-18 solo demonstration, taking off to join Red Knight for a heritage flight. It's fair to say the Canadian Hornet fleet is feeling the effects of its maturity. There have been a couple of embarrassing technical problems over the last few display seasons, and the aircraft are approaching the end of their useful lives with no replacement yet selected. The Air Force are also suffering from an acute personnel shortage, and they could probably benefit from a little more funding as well. All of that meant a reduced display season in 2019, and the display jet special scheme was limited just to the tail fins rather than covering the whole aircraft as it has done for the last few years. It is, though, an excellent demonstration, and given we missed it in part 1 of this programme, it seems fitting that we come full circle back to the modern military theme and end Airshow Action 2019 with a quick look at the CF-18 demo team. If you haven't yet watched part 1, there's plenty more action like this, so do go and take a look. Likewise, we also have a dedicated Oshkosh programme, which features even more Warbird and military action. You can find all that, as well as uncut, unnarrated videos of many of these individual performances on the Airshow Stuff YouTube channel. And if the European airshows intrigued you, This Is Flight have dedicated Airshow Dispatch episodes featuring all of those events and more, which you can watch by visiting thisisflight.net/videos and clicking Series 2. From Airshow Stuff and from This Is Flight, thank you for joining us, and see you next time.